bienvenue dans ce nouvel épisode de Xavier parle avec des gens. Et aujourd'hui, je vais parler avec Peter DEMAREST, qui est fondateur et président de Axiogenics. So, welcome everybody on this new episode of Xavier Speak with People, or Xavier Talks with People. And today we have Peter DEMAREST, that is the founder and president of Axiogenics. Hey, I see you now, Peter. First, thank you for being here with me, and I hope we'll have some good time. So I'd like to say that first, I know you for a few years now, and I've followed one of your programs about self-leadership and the science. Yes, because that's important. There is a science. It's not just stuff that we speak about, and let's try to make it happen. No, there is a real science with real things inside. So we are going to talk about that probably a little bit. And from the previous episode, we talked about corporate culture, organizational culture. So we are going to talk about OD. Well, at least I would like we talk about OD. I hope for you, Peter, you want to. So OD, for people who don't know, that means organizational development. And there is something that I think is interesting to notice, because for a lot of people, OD is like a department inside a company, a department under HR. But OD, like organizational development, is a movement as well, thought movement. And I think most people forget that. And what is very interesting is that it started, if I'm quite right, in the 40s after the Second World War. And the OD movement is how to say that, is more like social people thinking, sociologists maybe, and probably psychologists as well, who start to think about people in the social environment of companies of work. So right now, a lot of people are thinking about OD, I guess, that's my feeling, in terms of how can we get out the most of people, while at the origin, it was not really that way. It was more about let's look at people and how do they live and how can we improve things. And Peter, you will tell me, I was thinking about that before we had this conversation. How could we can simplify the way of thinking of OD? And I thought maybe, like, if you want to develop a child, what do you do? And I was thinking, maybe you are more experienced than me. If you want to develop a child, well, basically you have to take care about him. And taking care about him, what could that mean? That could mean taking care of him physically speaking, like feeding him, emotionally, intellectually, like feeding, nurturing his intellect, and spiritually, how can we enhance his spirit? And if you think in these terms, like a child, how to develop a child, by taking care of his physical needs, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual needs and well-being, we could say. If we put that in terms of OD, organizational development, I guess we could say that good OD practitioner and good OD thinkers are thinking in these 4 terms, I guess. So I said we are going to talk about OD today. I would like to ask you, Peter, how Axiogenics could, maybe Axiogenics cannot talk about everything or address all the OD possibilities. Just to narrow a little bit, maybe you could tell us where Axiogenics fits in the OD space.
Yeah. Well, first, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be connected with you and to share this conversation with you and your audience. So, you know, OD in the broadest sense, I believe, is all about everything that has anything to do with furthering organizational effectiveness. And sustainability, the health of the organization. But if you really think about it, an organization is an organism made up of people, right? And so ultimately, in the broadest sense, OD, organizational development, rightly is the purview of anything and everything that has to do with people's effectiveness, people's performance. And by extension, then, not only individuals, but also teams of people. And those teams could be small, you know, very temporary project teams, and the effectiveness of a team, the effectiveness of a permanent department or a division of a company, and right on up to the largest team that we typically call the organization, and everything in between. So that would encompass HR, certainly, and from an OD perspective, it's primarily things like talent attraction and development and onboarding and retention. So the recruiting piece of it, getting the right people on board. But it also involves the learning and development, talent development, succession planning, leadership development, culture change and optimization, and of course, leadership itself, because leadership itself, in fact, I believe leadership is fundamentally an OD function, right? And historically, if you go out and Google OD or organization development and its definition, you'll find that it is considered to be a whole system approach using behavioral sciences to impact the effectiveness and health of an organization. Axiogenics brings a whole different level of science to the field of OD, and specifically bringing the cognitive sciences that have been missing from the behavioral sciences into the picture, so that we can really address at a deeper level all of those aforementioned functions that could fall under the OD umbrella. It's a cutting edge science. It's a groundbreaking science, not just my words, but, you know, in our book, Answering the Central Question, that Stephen Covey of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he's the one that called it first the groundbreaking science. And and we've evolved since then to really decode what makes people tick and how they can actually be supported in learning to tick better for their own reasons. So that, in a nutshell, is saying that Axiogenics addresses everything in OD that has to do with how people think.
Which helping people think.
Yeah.
Yes, thinking is prior to performance.
It is. The interesting thing is, if you really look at most OD interventions, and when I say OD, I'm including things like learning and development, talent development, leadership development as the core of how we develop people and increase effectiveness and unleash human ability. Almost all of it is focused on, first, you start with a needs analysis. So we're going to collect a bunch of data, do 360s and various skills assessments and functional assessments of how people are getting along, cultural assessments, and the like. And that needs analysis is going to determine a few things. Some of it might determine that some reorganization would help the company be, or the organization be, more effective. But a lot of it, particularly the areas that Axiogenics would be applying to, is recognizing that there are some shortcomings in people's competencies and in their skills of either leadership or teamwork, or, you know, there's a whole list. You can go to any of the books in my background here, and you know, you'll get lists and lists and lists of various competencies. And then they strategize about the interventions and the training and the development that they're going to put into place, whether that takes the form of formal training or informal coaching, formal coaching, or even informal mentoring coaching, things like that, that they come up with all kinds of programs to and interventions to try to address what actually is the symptoms of what's really going on. But it's often thought of as the cause. I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
Let's take one of the hot topics today: diversity, equity, and inclusion. Okay, that's one of the hottest topics in the world of OD.
Yeah.
And data collection would say things like people in certain categories aren't getting hired, or they're not getting promoted into management and leadership roles at the same rate that other categories of people are. And so what's the fix? Well, we need to hire and promote more people, right? But the reality is there's a reason why they're not being hired and promoted, okay? And there's an underlying cause of that has to do with how people think, particularly how people think about people that are different than them, right? And if you can't address the underlying thought processes, then you're not really going to ultimately solve the problem. Here in the United States, a number of years ago, there was a whole movement called Affirmative Action.
Called what?
Affirmative Action.
Okay, that's
okay. Affirmative Action was a policy that said universities, for example, must admit a greater percentage of people from diverse backgrounds, right? Whether they be Asian or Black or American Indian or women, into whatever program it might have been. The disadvantaged needed to have a leg up. Organizations, while it wasn't legislated that they had to hire more people, public education, they could legislate, but private corporations, they couldn't so much legislate, but they put a lot of pressure and gave various tax incentives to having companies give preferential treatment to disadvantaged, past disadvantaged people. Sounds great on the surface, doesn't it?
Yeah, like sounds like we are fighting against racism and all these kind of things. And if you, yes, like you say, make laws, people have to follow the laws, and everybody will be happy ever after.
Right. Well, except that's not how it worked out. Was it helpful? Yes, to a certain degree, and certainly to a large number of people who were given opportunities that they might not otherwise have been given. But there's also the reality that it didn't do very much to actually change people's attitudes related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, today we also see in the OD and the learning and development world all kinds of courses and things. Let's learn about diversity, equity, inclusion. Let's talk about diversity, equity, inclusion. Let's give courses about the unfairness and the injustice of prejudice and the glass ceiling in terms of women being promoted and the unfair treatment of disadvantaged folks. But talking about it doesn't really get you very far. And we don't need to just talk about diversity, equity, inclusion. We can talk about empathy, that is emotional intelligence. We can talk about compassion and empathy. And then today, with the pandemic and all the dramatic global changes in the workplace and people working from home and telecommuting and all the disruption that that's created, we're having to deal with a whole nother set of problems and challenges on top of the economic challenges of the pandemic, the workplace challenges of the pandemic, and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the political divisiveness, particularly here in the United States and other parts of the world. All of these are converging, and it's creating what's commonly called, the new norm, but nobody really knows what the new norm is going to look like. But here's what I know. What I know is that the old ways of addressing organization development, learning and development, leadership development will not work in whatever the new norm ends up being, because it didn't even work in the old norm. Okay? And so
it did not work before, so
right. So doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different outcome, isn't going to get us anywhere. And I'm not trying to say that Axiogenics has the magic key. When you think of Axiogenics, don't think of it as a company. Think it as the science of neuroaxiology. And there's a pedagogy that's under it called neuroaxiological cognitive remodeling, where we're able to actually measure how people think in just 15 minutes, and then help them to maximize their best thinkings in a way that solves a lot of the problems that OD is trying to address at the symptomatic level.
Okay.
Yeah.
Temps mort. I don't know how to say that in English, but in French it's temps mort. Like pause.
Just stop me. It's fine.
Well, I think that's important for people who are watching and listening to us. You were talking about neuroaxiology, and maybe it deserves a few words of explanation. So you will tell me if I'm right or wrong.
Sure.
So neuro, it's like, it does the same neuro, like neurons, like neurology. Is that the same neuro?
Well, neurology is more about the nervous system in the body, like what makes us feel. We're talking about neuroscience. So getting to the how the brain works, and what we're taking from neuroscience isn't so much which part of the brain does what, but rather what are the mechanics of brain change, so neuroplasticity, as it's called. What is it that motivates people? Why do people do what they do? And it has nothing to do with personality. It has to do with sort of the DNA, if you will, and the what fires off parts of the brain, regardless of what parts of the brain it is. What is the mechanics of emotion and thought process and decision making, and how we make judgments, like how do we decide things, but also all about habits. Where do habits come from? Why do we have habits? And what causes, can we change habits? Do changes, habits change? Personality, even like behaviors that you can observe, they're really symptoms. Personality is just a symptom of what's really going on.
I love that. Personality is just a symptom.
Yeah.
Well, like a lot of people, put personality in front of everything and try to hire people depending on personality. And what is funny is that are there at least one definition of personality? Well, I guess there are no one single definition. So when you try to hire people on personality traits, it's like jeopardizing with dice. A lot of people don't know, they don't even agree on what they're talking about. Well, that was just a small something on the side. Excuse me, I cut you. But just to talk, so you said neuro. thank you for explaining everything you said. And
Yeah,
now
so
axiology, and if I'm right,
Mhm.
when we are talking about axiology, we are talking about formal axiology.
yes, formal meaning scientific, mathematical, axiology, axiology meaning value science. You can Google it, right?
Hmm.
As you know, it's been around as a philosophy for 2,500 years or so, since going back to Plato and Socrates, who were investigating philosophically, why do we do what we do, and why, in seemingly the very same circumstances, looking at the same evidence or the same situation, one person will make one decision or perceive something one way, and another person will make a different decision based on a different perception. And what even Plato and Socrates came to recognize is the human mind is fundamentally driven by our perceptions and judgments of value, the relative value of things, the goodness versus badness of everything that our senses take in. And in fact, in English, if you think about what thinking is, it is a process of evaluation, right? Evaluation. And it's speaking to that we're constantly judging value. So value, not values per se, as in the idealistic aspirational values, but rather our perceptions and judgments of the relative value of things is what drives the human mind and spirit. So why we do everything. Xavier, think about it this way. Think of the very worst thing you've ever done in your whole life. The most despicable, the most shameful, the most horrible thing that you've ever done in your entire life. Okay?
Peter,
you don't have to say
we are recording. I'm not going to tell you here.
No, you don't have to tell me what it is. Just think of it, okay? And for all of those that are listening, think of it also, not your own. And if you replay that experience, somehow, some way, you determined, you justified, you decided that doing that horrible, shameful thing was the right thing or the best thing for you to do in that moment, at least for you. It was only in hindsight that you realized, that was not a good idea. Right? Now, what caused you to do it? It might have been peer pressure. It might have been a desire to get your way or to punish somebody. But somehow we human beings are so capable of justifying horrible things. Look what they did in Germany in World War II and throughout history. Different people have committed horrible acts against other people, but somehow they justified it as being the high value thing to do, the right thing to do, the good thing to do for them or for their country or for their power or their ego or their whatever well-being. And I want to, if you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, at the very low end of it, you've got pure survival. And I'm not talking about that. There's, in the animal kingdom, of course, animals kill each other over food. I'm talking about more of what we do in societies. So here in the world, slavery as an example. And so axiology is the study, historically the philosophical study of how, what are values and value and what does it mean and how does ethics and morality and things like that fit into it. Formal axiology was born, if you will, in the mid 1900s by a Dr. Robert Hartman, who applied scientific methodology to the study of value. And he was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize as a result of his really bringing to the world a way of understanding that there is an objective reality to value. There's something called the hierarchy of value. Just like Maslow had the hierarchy of needs, Dr. Hartman was able to
Yeah.
discover that there's a hierarchy of value.
May
By the
I
way, and
make
they
a
were
side
friends.
note?
Maslow and Hartman were friends with each other. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to make a side note.
Yeah.
Dr. Hartman, that's quite interesting to know because, of course, he was a PhD holder. So you just think about you, your environment, your friends. How many PhD holder do you know? Well, not so many. How many people who got 2 PhDs do you know?
I know of a
How many
handful, right?
people
Yeah.
who got 3 PhDs
Yes.
do you know? And Dr. Hartman had, tell me if I'm wrong, he had 3 PhDs.
He did.
One in law, one in mathematics, and one in philosophy.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
And that's important to say because, you know, sometimes you say, oh, doctor, somebody, but people are not even doctor. And as we are talking about real science with real maths, mathematics, it's interesting to note that the founder of this thinking and this whole science has 3 PhDs, and in sciences that are not, in fields that are not really related at the origin, and somehow he relates everything.
Yeah.
And to say about Maslow and as you said, Maslow and Hartman, I read somewhere that of course they exchanges not email, mail, letters.
Well, and they vacationed every year together as well, and they you know, shared. There were various associations that they were members of together, board members of, etc. So they and other people from that day that they're closely related to. Yeah.
And I read somewhere in the book of an article that somehow there would not be any Maslow hierarchy, that, you know, the pyramid, without Hartman and his input and insight to, well, I cannot say that's true, but it's maybe the legend. No, that just, I'm saying all this just to position Hartman, that is at the origin of this science, and what is really this science, and what are the foundations.
Yeah.
Just that was
and also
something.
It may be helpful for folks to know that Dr. Hartman passed away in 1973, but to this day, there is a global organization called the Robert Hartman Institute. It is headquartered at the University of Tennessee, and you know, with conventions every year and a journal that comes out quarterly, I believe it is. So his work lives on. So axiology is formal. Axiology is a very real science, and Dr. Hartman did 2 really important things. One is they identified that there is, in fact, an objective way to understand value, that in nature, value actually has a hierarchical structure to it. And I won't go into the science right now, but just to note that he also said, but in the human mind, value is completely subjective.
Yes, that's a very important point, because for when we talk with our friends or with most of the time, values, that's subjective. Me, I believe that, and you believe that, and me is here, and you here, and blah 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 blah. And what is really important is that, as you said, he found out that there is an objective. So getting out of the subjectivity to find an objective hierarchy of values.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's very fundamental shift.
Yeah, and one of the things that he one of his studies in particular, where he was working with various organizations, he was able to identify that when when the preponderance of an organization, so a culture, its leaders, its managers, and the way it treats its employees, is such that it is in very close alignment with the hierarchy of value. For example, they actually put the intrinsic value of people above all else, that organization will see an average of 40% greater productivity and performance than those organizations that don't put people first. Now, that was back in the 1960s that he discovered that. Now we go 50 years later, almost 60 years later, and we start to see that there's all this talk now about, putting people first, that people are the most important asset, et cetera, et cetera. It's been given a lot of lip service and a lot of effort towards trying to do that. But it turns out that people first is not just a nice management or leadership idea. It is a scientific fact. And when we're doing more than just giving it lip service, when an organization and the way that the people in that organization think actually put the intrinsic value of people above all else in alignment with the hierarchy of value, they will see significant gains in productivity, performance across the board compared to those that don't. There's an organization here in the United States called Great Place to Work Institute that while they don't explicitly do anything around axiology, they don't, to my knowledge, I don't even know if they know that it exists, but they do analysis on organizations through surveys to determine what are the companies that are really great organizations to work for and what makes them different. And in my own meta-analysis of their data, indeed, their own statistics say that great places to work companies significantly outperform all other companies from a statistical analysis in terms of their stock value, in terms of employee engagement and employee turnover, attraction to talent, productivity per capita, stock market statistics, et cetera. And the analysis of it is those are also companies who tend to operate in closer alignment with the hierarchy of value. So this hierarchy of value has some real meat to it. Here's the problem with axiology historically, and that is telling people what they should value doesn't work very well. That gets us back to diversity, equity, and inclusion, doesn't it? It's like telling people they should not be biased doesn't make people unbiased. Right?
Ouais, ah oui.
Right? So what can we do about all of that? Historical behavioral sciences and 360s will give us evidence of symptoms of personality itself. Like if you're looking for a definition of personality, I would say it is the sum total of a person's, or it's a way of looking at the dominant behavioral tendencies that a person has, right? On the outside. And then they try to explain maybe some of what's going on the inside to explain the behaviors, but they're not actually measuring what's going on the inside. So another thing that Dr. Hartman did that's really important is he developed something called the Hartman Value Profile Assessment Instrument. You've taken it, right? And it is a way of measuring how a person thinks across a framework of 36 what we call axiological perspectives, and determine how well does a person's all their thinking align to the hierarchy of value. Where is their ways of thinking that are in alignment with the hierarchy of value? We call those cognitive assets, because they're your best ways of thinking that will allow you to make the best decisions to create the most value. And where is your habits of mind, your actual biases that you've developed over your lifetime that are cause your thoughts and actions and decisions and reactions and habits to be out of alignment. Technically, they are biases. They literally are biases, where you put too much or too little value on something from certain perspectives. So we're identifying your cognitive biases. And it's those biases that actually limit human performance. It's the biases that undermine happiness, effectiveness, both at the individual level and ultimately at the organizational level. When they undermine, we call them cognitive liabilities. So now what we have is we know what the target is in terms of the hierarchy of value, and we also understand how a person thinks relative to that hierarchy of value, what's good and what's not so good, and we all have both, right?
Mm-hmm.
And but then we take it one step further, and modern neuroscience has taught us how to help a person bring their own thinking into greater alignment with the hierarchy of value. And then, so at the individual level, but also how does that reflect on the bigger picture of OD in terms of the vision, mission, and values of the organization? How do we lead in such a way that we empower and we engage and we elicit people's best thinking? How do we teach people the practices of what we call Axiogenic self-leadership, so they're bringing forth and engaging their own best thinking in pursuit of creating greater value in any circumstance that matters, and in alignment with their own intrinsic motivations for what they want in their life, in alignment with what the organization needs. So there's this whole body of work around organization development and individual people and talent and leadership development that connects all the dots together without dealing with the sort of whack-a-mole latest fad that comes down the pike to put out the fires of the symptoms of underperformance and the symptoms of what's getting in the way of success, the symptoms of a lack of diversity, equity, and inclusion, the symptoms of how emotional intelligence isn't present. I mean, you could talk about any of those, sort of personality and competency-based things, and underneath every single one of them, ultimately, is a dependency on the quality and nature of a person's thinking, and that's what the science of neuroaxiology allows us to actually address. And what's really cool about it is we can address it for less cost and in less time than it takes to do all the other things that people are trying to do.
Maybe that's the part of the speech that is suspicious.
Okay. And I don't blame anybody for being skeptical, because that's not been people's experience in the corporate world. How many times have you seen people, or you yourself, gone into a training of some kind, or a company retreat, and go, okay, here we go again, we're going to get all the fluffy speeches and we're going to have some wonderful experiences. Of course, we haven't done much of that in the last year via Zoom. That's kind of how you do that, but because people are skeptical. In fact, that the mainstream approaches have created the skepticism, because statistically they don't work very well. They're important, they're well-intentioned, they're doing the best they can with the science and knowledge that they have, but few people actually know that neuroaxiology exists yet. Hopefully a few more, because they're watching this. So that it's not like they're failing with any kind of intention or lazy. It's just there's been a missing piece in the puzzle of behavioral sciences and the approaches to mainstream. I'll give you an example. The science has shown that things like fake it till you make it and positive affirmations actually don't work very well beyond a very temporary impact that they can have. But in the long term, they can be detrimental. There's other approaches that work much better, much faster. So I don't blame you for being skeptical, because a lot of what the science is revealing is at odds with what we've all bought into historically, like fixing the weaknesses, fixing the symptoms of bad behavior. Right? When we can identify good thinking and maximize good thinking, what we call your A game, your assets, your most able ways of thinking, and simultaneously, as a result, make your ways of thinking that contribute to your B game irrelevant in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now we're literally changing the game. And that's why a lot of OD practitioners with PhDs and masters, MSODs, et cetera, coaches, learning and development folks that have studied what we're doing here are literally calling it a game changer for the whole field.
Just a little something. You said that positive affirmation on the long term, on the long run, could be detrimental. Maybe you can give a little something about that.
Sure. So there's a popular phrase that came out of the fields of neuroscience and studying neuroscience and neuroplasticity in recent years. And there's two ways of expressing it. One is what fires together, wires together.
Mm-hmm.
You're probably familiar with that little term.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means is when two things occur in the brain at the same time, they tend to get connected in some way. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So when we see something and it triggers a thought, this is sort of Pavlov's dog, right? When the bell rings and food is presented, those two things come together. So now if just the bell rings and there's no food, the dog still salivates. Okay. So what fires together, wires together. Well, the reverse is also true. What wires together, fires together, which is the reverse of Pavlov's dog. Okay. Now, what does that have to do with people? Because we're not dogs, but we do have a brain. Okay. So here's the interesting thing. When positive affirmations are used to compensate for negative thoughts, okay? Now we can also say when an abundance practice is used to compensate for or negate, in a sense, a scarcity mentality, okay? We are inadvertently firing those two things in very close proximity. So they start to wire together.
Mm.
So if I have this little voice in my head that says I'm not good enough, right? And some success guru comes along and says, look, just tell yourself, you're great, you can do. Whenever you hear that voice, just say, you're great. Well, that sounds great, doesn't it? And it even feels good to say, I'm great. And it will give you a temporary boost. Sort of like, the athlete, before they go out on the stage, they want to give themselves a boost of adrenaline. So they get pumped up. We're going to win, and the Maori people in New Zealand have I forget what it's called, but the dance that they do to intimidate and pump themselves up and intimidate the other opponent. And, the Native Americans have the war dance that they've done. I mean, this is throughout history of human beings. That it gives us that temporary boost. But here's what happens in the practice of positive affirmations to compensate for negative thoughts. We develop the practice. If I hear that voice, I'm not good enough, I'm going to say, I'm great, I can do this. And invariably what happens is something like this. I'm great, I can do this. Liar, pants on fire. Who are you trying to fool? And that voice comes right back, and it's still there. Now, sometimes we can get it to bury, but there's this inside, we know we're lying to ourselves because we don't actually believe that we're good enough. And by the way, we've assessed tens of thousands of people, many of whom have made it a lifelong practice, and we can see it in their assessments that they actually still don't believe they're good enough. Okay? And what often happens, all too often happens, is saying I'm good enough doesn't necessarily alter my behaviors, so I fail. And that failure is providing evidence that we're still not good enough. And then we think, not only are we not good enough to begin with, we're not even good enough at having a positive affirmation. Boy, we must be really bad. Something's really wrong with us. And there's been studies that show it can be detrimental in the long run.
Okay, I see now. Thank you for killing the hope of all the people who were doing
No, let's not kill
self-affirmation.
the hope. Just I want you to help. If you out there in the audience are somebody who has practiced positive affirmations and you're finding it's not really helping, you're not the problem. The problem is the technique doesn't actually work consistent with how the brain works beyond a temporary adrenaline boost to get up on the stage for public speaking or something like that to give you a little boost of confidence. But it doesn't solve the long-term problem, and it's not your fault. But there is another approach. There is another way, and it has to do with the questions that you ask yourself. And that's one of the things of what we call NCRT, neuro-axiological cognitive remodeling. Because we can measure all the ways you think, we can also teach you the questions that will cause you to engage your best thinking, literally in a heartbeat. And it manifests physically in a change, spiritually, mentally, and from a decision-making and an engaging other people, engaging our decision-making process. So we're using our best thinking rather than our less than best ways of thinking. And there's one question in particular that is sort of a catch-all, but it's one that shifts the mindset. One of the things we've discovered is everybody's heard of different mindsets: abundance mindset, scarcity mindset. More recently, the big popular one is growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. Okay.
Yeah.
Doesn't work very well to tell people they should have a growth mindset and to make them wrong.
Yes, that's very difficult. And by the way, when you ask people, a lot of them believe, no, I'm doing good. I have a growth mindset, at least more than you.
Yeah, and not only that, but my fixed mindset is the right mindset, so why should I fix it, right? So anyway, well, what we also have found, and this even goes back to Plato and Socrates, is that there's another level to it, and that is we can have a self-centric mindset where we're really engaged in how do I protect myself? How do I get what I want? What's in it for me? What will they think of me? How do I make myself understood, right? So it's all about me. It's not necessarily selfish or even arrogant. It's just self-centric, okay? So we're kind of the center of our universe, sort of concept. The other is what we have come to call a value-genic mindset, where the focus is on how do I create value? Remember that I said value is the driving force of the human mind and spirit. We are attracted to things and will pursue things that we believe will create value, and will fight and resist things that we think are going to take value away. And we're pretty apathetic of everything in between. Okay? But if you think about the real success in life, what does that really mean? The value-genic mindset arises out of the recognition that real success in any worthwhile endeavor is not about the value you get, but rather the value you create. And a value-genic mindset is one where I'm focused on creating value. That's my fundamental purpose in life, if you will. Not trying to get something. Like, there's a reason they call it making love. It's because love is something you create.
Yeah.
Right? But that's also true about abundance. Abundance is something that we create. And as a result of creating an abundance, then it comes back to us. So it's the creation process. So there's something we call the central question of life, love, and leadership. And for your listeners, I'd invite them to write this down. Stop the video if they need time to do so, but it's this question. What choice can I make? Yeah, what choice can I make and action can I take in this moment to create the greatest net value? What we find is that question, above all others, helps us as human beings and as individuals to shift from a self-centric mindset to a value-genic mindset. It also tends to cause us to move out of our biased ways of thinking, where it's all about me, which is why we have the bias to start with, to our cognitive assets. Even if they're unnamed, it helps us to bring forth some of our better thinking so we can make better decisions, interact at a better level. And that little word net, greatest net value, doesn't mean only for other people. It means all things considered, for all people concerned, including yourself, both short and long term. And it's a big question. It's a big concept, and we'll never answer it perfectly all the time. The problem is we don't ask the question enough. We as human beings, every person alive has a greater ability to answer the question if they'd only conscientiously ask it. And if people get nothing more out of this, video, I hope they take that one away.
Just rewind a little bit before.
Yeah.
You said, correct me if I did not understood well. You said what did you say exactly? You said so many things. You were talking about success.
Yeah.
And that's there are a lot of things on the internet and outside of internet about success, what is success and how to reach success and how to be successful and how to be more successful. And you said, if I'm right, we are successful, we feel more successful, not when we get value from the outside world, but when we create value for us and the rest of the world. Is that did I understood well?
I want to separate what creates value or success, rather, what creates success versus what has us feel successful. Okay. I certainly would acknowledge that what has us feel successful is the value that we receive. But what creates that? In order to receive value, somebody needs to create it. Let me give you an example. Oftentimes, people feel really, really good. In fact, there have been neurological studies done, functional MRIs of the brain, about what lights up and releases the feel-good neurochemicals in the brain. Okay, norepinephrine and oxytocin and the like. And the studies that have been done show that we feel our best when we make a difference, when we are focused on contributing to our fellow man, or kind, when we altruistic, if you will, in that sense. But I don't want to go too far to say that it's about the greater good and self-sacrificial, because that's not what we're saying. That there's two sides of the coin, and you are every bit as important and valuable as any other person or even a group of people. Intrinsically speaking, it's part of what the hierarchy of value teaches us. So the question then is, what creates the value that we can receive? And the answer is, we do. So it's kind of like a chicken and the egg, okay? Before you can receive the egg, you have to have the chicken. So before you can receive the value, it needs to be created, and it's incumbent upon all of us. Let's go back to OD. Let's go back to
That's the
business and performance. Okay, what is performance? What's the definition of high performance versus low performance? What differentiates the two? And the answer is really simple. Performance is a qualitative way of expressing the quantitative value of results. Okay, big mouthful. Let me explain.
Please repeat it again.
Yes.
Quality, quantity.
So high performance versus low performance. Okay. High is a qualitative word. It's an adjective. So it qualifies performance. And low performance is also a quality of performance. Okay. Well, how do we say one versus the other? And that has to do with the value of the results of something. Well, let's take sales. Okay. In many organizations, a salesperson is given, or a sales department is given a quota, a goal. They're going to sell X number of dollars or euros of something over the course of some period of time. Okay. Because that's the goal, that's the standard, and if you exceed that, that's called high performance, right? It means measured as revenue, sales revenue, you exceeded the expectation, and we define that as high performance. If you fall under that, you didn't deliver that level of results, then it's called low performance. But in that specific circumstance, value is being defined as revenue, sales revenue. Okay? So if you deliver more value than that identified goal or standard or norm or expectation, then it's called high performance. We can apply it to sports.
Yeah, right? To whatever.
Take soccer or football, right? A high performer is somebody who does better than the average person in terms of either scoring goals or preventing goals, and everything that happens in between, and whatever their particular role is, whether they're a striker, a forward, or a fullback, or a goalie, or whatever their particular role. We can apply it to American football. We can apply it to, any role. We can apply it to parenting. But in a corporation, performance at the individual level, performance at the team level can be defined as the value created by the results produced relative to a given standard, norm, expectation, quota, etc. Okay?
Yeah.
So performance is an expression of outcomes. And outcomes, of course, come from what? Behaviors and actions. And reactions, if we will. Well, where do they come from? Choices and habits. And where does that come from? Thinking. That's where it comes from. Okay? Thinking is the catalyst that turns potential, like knowledge and skills and resources into action into outcomes into performance.
May I say something? When you are saying it comes from thinking, well, I tend to agree. And I'm sure that there are some of the people who are watching, listening, are saying, I'm well educated. I've done great schools that are difficult to enter in to get the diploma. So I guess I know how to think. And I think that here we should have the little difference, because you said things are coming from behaviors and so on are coming from, originated from thinking, maybe we should say making decision making, the thinking process of making decision.
Sure. But often decisions are not made consciously. So when I talk about thinking, that's both the conscious point. And subconscious.
Yes, that's the point. That's the point.
There are plenty of people with PhDs who are quite ineffective in their job or their life or their role, right? So knowledge alone isn't enough. It's what do we do with that knowledge? Can we wisely apply knowledge and translate that into actions, decisions and actions and choices and behaviors that produce high value results? Right? And because we're able to analyze and diagnose all the different ways you think, we can identify which ways of thinking support you in doing that and which ways undermine your abilities to do that. By the way, this may shock people, or maybe not. I mentioned earlier, we've diagnosed tens of thousands of people's thinking, and one of the things that we've discovered, not only have we discovered it, but it actually arises out of psychology and neuroscience and behavioral sciences, that our habits of mind, our cognitive biases that we measure, dominate 85 to 95% of everything a person does. 85 to 95% of people's actions and reactions and interactions and decisions and their emotions are dominated by their less than best ways of thinking, their B game. What's that mean? That means that people are only at their very best 5 to 15% of the time. That's it. They only engage in A game 5 to 15% of the time.
That's absolutely incredible.
Well, here's the next incredible part, and that is that all the success you've had, all the success that an organization has had in the past and up to the present, has been based on people only being their best 5 to 15% of the time. That's it. And it's not like our biases are all bad. There is an upside, what we call an upside to the bias, but it also undermines at the same time. And we won't get into that for the moment, but we're only at our best 5 to 15% of the time. The standards of performance, remember I talked about performance as a measure of value created compared to a standard? Well, the very standards themselves have been developed out of people's expectations of what is appropriate, what is reasonable to expect people to do. And that reasonableness is inadvertently based on people only being their best 5 to 15% of the time. But what would happen if people could engage their A game, their best ways of thinking, another 5 to 10% of the time? That's it. Just 5%, just a little teeny bit more. A few minutes, literally, out of their day. They could bring more of their A game. The impact on not just performance, but even on their quality of life is profound. And by extension, what happens within organizations that adopt that. We have, there's one particular company in particular that has adopted the Axiogenics approach to pretty much everything that they do, from hiring and selection and onboarding to talent development, having valuegenic self-leadership as the first thing that every employee goes through before they engage in any other type of skill development. And all the executives have been through it. Every employee can go through it now. They recently were surveyed by a third party, assessed by a third party around employee engagement. And they're at 99% employee engagement. Active employee engagement.
99%.
Employees that left the company a number of years ago that are begging to come back to work for the company because there's no better company in its category to go work for. Happens to be a construction company. And a large, very large commercial, industrial kind of construction company. And, you know, the employees are talking about they've never worked for such an extraordinary company. That's the only company that actually they've ever worked for that lives true to its values. They have gone from struggling and troublesome culture to a culture where 99% engagement levels of their employees.
That's incredible.
Yeah,
99%.
99%. And
who is the 1%?
Retention levels are sky high. They have, as a construction company, they no longer miss deadlines. They're 100% on time, on budget, customer satisfaction. They're the preferred customer for all of their vendors, so they get preferential treatment. They have more people wanting to go work for the company than they have positions to be able to hire for at the moment. And it's just phenomenal examples of what happens when a valuegenic approach to OD is taken and all the pieces of that puzzle.
Okay, I believe this Ask the Question. What Axiogenics can bring to OD. I think we got it now.
I think so.
Okay, I'm not going to guarantee that every company that contacts Peter is going to have the same result, because I'm not working in his company and I'm not his sales person. But just it's quite kind of mind-blowing. Peter, we talk a lot of things, and I have not checked when we started, but probably around 1 hour ago.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to say thank you for this conversation, and throwing away some truths and some untruths, and being quite open on everything we talked about. Do you have something you would like to add as a conclusion?
Well, first, thank you for having the conversation. You know, it's been a lot of fun. It's always great to connect with you. I know what your passion out there in the world is, and your, you know, so much of your work is, you know, we briefly talked about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it's your work around expatriates and how they can integrate themselves into different cultures than their original cultures. And your work in OD has always been great, and we've always appreciated your appreciation for the work that we're doing here in Axiogenics. So thank you, and invite you to keep up your work. You are somebody who takes a valuegenic approach to things. And so, you know, and to your audience, again, you know, I would just invite them to, at the very least, start thinking about the central question. What choice can I make and action can I take in this moment to create the greatest net value? Ask yourself that question whenever you're struggling, frustrated, overwhelmed, procrastinating, angry, and see if that doesn't start to shift your being a little bit. And obviously, you know, what we do as a company is we train and certify other people in this science, other coaches and consultants and internal and external, to bring this into organizations or into their own coaching and consulting firms. So anybody who wants to talk to us about that, we'd love to have that conversation.
And for people who are looking for you, I can see behind you there is Axiogenics, so you can see how to write it, and it's axiogenics.com.
That's it.
Yeah, very simple. Peter, wish you a great day, and talk to you soon. And thank you for watching us and listening. And if you enjoy it, well, you can click like. If you want to comment because you have some question or whatever, you can comment. If you don't like it, well, I'm very surprised that you are still here. And if you don't like it, don't waste your time, don't do anything. And if you want to subscribe, well, subscribe, and talk to you soon. Bye-bye.